Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, I'll just give you that.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Hotel Andalus and the Trase launch event. We've been waiting for a few more people to come in, but I think we're going to get started now. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Nicky Mardas. I'm the director of the Global Canopy Program based in Oxford, UK. And I just want to start with the warmest of welcomes to you. Thank you for coming outside the COP to make it here. Hopefully other people will trickle in. We've got a great event lined up with the launch of Trase. We've got a fantastic panel and a Q&A, and we've got some drinks. We're going to have a drinks party afterwards. So thank you all again. And for us, this is a hugely important waypoint. It's neither an end nor a beginning. It's a point after 2 years of quite intense effort. But it's also the start of what we hope will grow to be a program over the next 5 years, tracking against 2020 commitments. And we hope to be working with you along the way. In the Lima COP, exactly 2 years ago, we met our colleagues from SEI, or I met our colleagues from SEI by chance in the side event. And we started that same day a collaboration after a 10-minute rushed meeting. And that collaboration led in Paris, exactly a year ago, at the Paris COP, to a demo version of this platform. There was a closed beta called Transformative Transparency, and now has led to this launch here, changed name, Trase, and it's a public launch. So we've gone from being a closed beta, where we engaged and consulted with some of the stakeholders for whom we think this will bring value, to a public launch today at Trase. .earth. So on behalf of that team, on behalf of SEI, and you'll meet some of the team, and we have Central Director Louise here from Stockholm with us, and on behalf of GCP, I'm really delighted to welcome you here today. And I want to start with an urgent problem, and you've all heard about urgent problems, so we're a little bit desensitized. So I'm going to go urgency cubed. The first urgency is climate change. That's not something this audience, at least this audience, needs to be convinced of at the COP, so I'm not going to talk more about that. The second urgent issue is to tackle deforestation. That's what the Global Canopy Program works on. That's what a team that we work with at SEI, of course, does many more things, but that's what the team at SEI that we're working with are focused on, and many of our partners are focused on, because this is a partnership as well. This goes beyond GCP and SEI to many, many institutions that have worked on this issue. But for us, tackling deforestation is a key focus and a key concern, and I know it is for many of you here. Globally, 20% or some 20% of emissions, regionally affecting hydrological cycles, biodiversity, locally impacting on livelihoods and rights of local people. And we also know this, that 2/3 over the last decade of that problem has been driven by the production and trade of a handful of what we, for 6 years now, have been calling forest risk commodities. Well known, I'm sure, to you all, the beefs, the soys, the palm oils, the timbers of the world, driving some 2/3 of this problem worldwide. And because now there is an emerging consensus around the need to tackle this issue, we have a huge opportunity. And I think that opportunity is embodied by the New York Declaration on Forests. It's a kind of shortcut, if you like, to say, okay, look, there's not just companies. The CDF came out with a landmark commitment some years ago, but governments, NGOs, financial institutions beginning to come on board. So if you want one go-to, I think for us, we always refer to the New York Declaration on Forests, and we're delighted to have Kevin Rabinovich here, who's one of the leaders in this space with Mars. But there's a huge and genuine barrier to that opportunity. And that is supply chain complexity and opacity. And it's a genuine barrier. Sometimes, we think at least, it's also can be an excuse. It can be kind of convenient. But it's also a very, very genuine problem. So take the case of soy from Brazil, and that's how we're launching this platform. You'll hear more about the way we're going to move along commodities. But take the case of soy from Brazil. The journeys that soy as a commodity makes from the field to the time it ends up in your chicken tagine here in Marrakech. It's a story of production and the effort that goes into that production. It's a story of people's lives. It's a story of chickens' lives. It's a story of thousands of journeys of sweat and tears and travels by sea and land. And that's one container worth of soy making one set of highly complex journeys. Now multiply that by 50% of the products in our supermarkets, each of which may contain a small fractional portion of some of those commodities, and you begin to get a very clear grasp for the kind of complexity that we're talking about. Which brings me to the third urgency. We've only had two so far. But the third urgent issue, and the issue that we are focusing this product and this launch on, is the need for transparency. And not just any old kind of transparency. We're saying that we need radical transparency. And that's an idea that has been sweeping the world, enabled by technology, and in some cases, more open information, but I'd say primarily by digital technology. And it's changing our lives in so many ways, and it's changing the world. Just ask Ed Snowden about that. It's in every part of our lives. And let's move now to our mission with Trase. We're looking towards radical transparency for a deforestation-free economy, because the whole sustainability sector needs radical transparency if we're to move towards the targets that we've set ourselves here at the COP and elsewhere. And deforestation, tackling the deforestation issue at long last, after half a century of incredibly often heroic efforts to do so, have all come to ultimately have not been successful. But now we're tackling the root, 2/3 of those of deforestation driven by commodities, and we have a chance to bring a new kind of transparency to the table. And that's been our mission as a cross-institutional team between GCP and SEI, and of course the many others that we've worked with, and Trase in a way is our response and the beginning of a journey to respond to that challenge and that third urgency. So before we formally launch, I'll leave it there for now. We can move to it. We're going to have a demonstration of the platform. We're going to have some responses from our wonderful panel that will be introduced by Sarah. And we'll have a Q&A and drinks. But before we move to launch the platform, I just wanted to make a brief tribute to its driving force. Our friend and obsessive and gifted leader, Javier Godard, who very unfortunately, his son has taken ill back home in Stockholm. So 2 hours ago, he had to get on a plane back to Stockholm after 2 hours of 2 years, not 2 hours. He can achieve a lot in 2 hours, but 2 years of very intense work. He had to leave this event that he was going to lead and go back to Stockholm. So this event is for Javier and for Martin, his son, and for Osa, his partner. So if we could move to the site, I can get over the formalities and officially launch the public site. And we start with the supply chain, because that's what this is all about, as I've said. And the challenge we've set ourselves is threefold. To simplify those gazillion transfers and complexities in a way that is tangible and accessible and open, because this is an open and independent platform. That's the first. The second is to tackle commodity transparency or supply chain transparency at scale, to get breadth across commodities and across the supply chain and across sectors. And the third is the inverse of that, in a way, to go granular enough to support decisions in a new way. Because if we simplify too much, then we stop being able to add value. So the third challenge is to go granular enough that we can inform decisions, because at the end of the day, that's why we're doing this work, to inform decisions, to enable decision makers. It's not an academic exercise, it's a policy-focused exercise, and it's a practical exercise. So very briefly, Toby, I don't know if you just could very briefly scroll down. I'm going to hand over to Toby for a demo in a second. But if you scroll down a little bit, you've got, I mean, this map here goes to the core of our offering. We're launching the site with soy, covering soy from Brazil, as you will hear. Here there's an extremely simplified view of the trade in that soy from Brazil to countries around the world. And our challenge has been to add the granularity that I talked before about to that picture, which Toby will talk about in a moment. And if we could keep scrolling down a little bit. Here we've got a series of stories. So we've tried to interpret some of the data and some of the insights that are coming out of the platform and out of its data to identify or begin identifying new insights. So the picture boxes go to deep dive, or we're calling deep dive stories, that will take a deeper view into some of the issues with some of the analysis. And then the flat colored boxes take you in further to the tool, but curate and begin to offer up initial insights on the tool itself as an entry point. And we're going to be adding to these as we go. But also, let me just say that this is a platform. What I mean by platform, in the truest sense, there's a platform strategy here, which means that our job as we see it, is to make this information available, accessible, and simple to use. And then we hope that all of you and many others around the world will use this data to provide policy relevant, and when I say policy relevant, actionable for all sectors, insights and information. So we've made a start, but our job is to provide the platform as we see it. And Toby, if we could scroll down a little bit more, and then I'm gonna hand over. Just right down to the bottom. Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly use this to acknowledge our partners, because I've talked a little bit about SCI and GCP, but we work very closely with the amazing team at Visuality, who are also working on Global Forest Watch and many other products, and with the European Forest Institute, who've been with us for all the way, really, as the initial donors. Of course, they're not just donors, they add a huge amount of intellectual capacity. We're fortunate to have Thomas with us today, who will be on the panel, to give their perspective as an institution supporting and advising the European Union on the question of forests and deforestation. So we couldn't have done this without them. And then you see a whole range of donors that have put money into this project, and we remain extremely grateful to them. So with that, on to Toby Gardner from the Stockholm Environment Institute, and a demo of the platform, which hopefully will go well, because we've been tweaking it today and in the last 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for coming. So, Nikki's given us a nice introduction to the issues. and also to the opportunities, and also to some of the barriers. And for many, the complexity of international supply chains, whether it's of soy or whether it's of even more complex supply chains like beef or oil palm, has been so stupefyingly complex that it's prevented, stifled, suffocated progress in areas where commitments have been made, and for some it's been also a convenient barrier or fog against which they can say that they're trying to do what they can because the system is too complex to move forward. And indeed it is complex. But at the heart of the proposition, the value proposition of what we're trying to present with Trase, is the opportunity to simplify that complexity to a point where it becomes useful. And that doesn't mean to say, and this also goes to the heart of our value proposition, it doesn't mean to say that we need to simplify it down to the finest degree, that we need to understand every single connection that links production landscapes with consumers, with traders, with other actors downstream. Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. At the heart of our proposition is that we can learn a lot by going some of the way. Now, I wanted to start with the simplest of depictions of the trade in soy from Brazil to the world. On the left, this is Brazilian soy, and on the right is the world. And until now, this has been the ability that we've had to link soy to countries across the world, to link the total exports of soy on a country-to-country basis. And you can clearly see, in this rather funky diagram here, you can clearly see that China dominates. This is 2015 exports. That's useful. It raises awareness. It tells you about something around the footprint, potentially the land footprint, the emissions footprint of soy produced in Brazil but consumed elsewhere. It's a starting point, but it's not a lot more than that. What we've done, cutting to the chase, with the Trase platform, is look at the complexity of the links between individual municipalities in Brazil, which are fine scale enough to have a subset of actors focused on them, to have a single regional government focused on it, to have a set of policies that an actor or consumer downstream can get into. And at the heart of this picture are two main pieces that distinguish the kind of transparency that we're unveiling here in Trase from the kinds of transparency we've had before. One of which is the coverage, the blanket coverage at scale, to be able to encompass the entire trade. This diagram shows you the entire trade of soy from individual Brazilian municipalities that produce it, there's more than 2,000, to countries worldwide that consume it via hundreds of exporters and importing companies. So it's a complete bird's eye view, and it gives you that at the scale of an entire country. And in the future, in the near future, we'll be expanding this to the scale of all soy production in all of the countries that produce it. In Latin America, which as many of you will be aware, is increasingly a lot more than Brazil. Now, if we go to, that's the visual that you needed to see. There's the complexity. Now that's demonstrated how we can start to unravel what otherwise looks like an impenetrable ball of string, if you like. How can you tease out individual threads that may pertain to a particular relationship with a particular set of actors connected to it, and a particular set of risks and opportunities that could and should be addressed? So let's dive in. Here you can see, on the left here you can see Brazil, and you can see the trade of soy coming from municipalities in Brazil via exporters, via importers, and via countries of consumption worldwide. And what this allows us to do is immediately tease out any given thread, any given connection that we may be interested in. Here's the relationship of the soy that's produced in Brazil that's consumed by Spain, for example. If we want to zoom in further, we can look at the relationship between the soy that's consumed by Spain, that's traded by Cargill, one of the world's largest traders in soy, and that's produced in Brazil. And we can tease out even more and take one single thread, Cachoeira do Sul, and map its trajectory as it arcs its way across the world to consumers and downstream retailers and manufacturers in Spain. And by doing so, we've obliterated the complexity that otherwise faced consumers or retailers in Spain with an interest in reducing the deforestation associated with their commitments to a single, tangible, traceable thread. Now, of course, we can go a lot deeper. This is just the top traders and the top producing regions and the top consuming countries. If we look at the entire supply chain, there's over 320,000 unique supply chain pathways. And you may be wondering at this point, how on earth have we managed to get to this comprehensive map of trade in all of Brazil's soil? 2,000 municipalities on the left, feeding through to countries around the world. What's at the core of our proposition is that we haven't needed to collect new data to do this. We haven't needed to model extensively existing data in order to make heroic assumptions to do this. No, instead what we've done, thanks to a huge and heroic effort by many in the team, particularly our colleagues Clement and Steve, who are with us, who've done a lot of the back work of this. This has not been a huge team, this has been a heroic team. Is to stitch together data sets that hitherto have not been tapped anything like to the potential that they can and should be if the sustainability community is serious about harnessing the potential of what radical transparency can offer. The ingredients that go into this at its heart are customs declarations collected by governments like Brazil, bills of lading collected by commercial entities that then sell on these data to trade intelligence companies that are extremely rarely used. We're looked upon with bemused astonishment when we approach trade intelligence companies to use these data. You're going to do what? This is a source that's not been tapped by the sustainability community. If you stitch those together and triangulate those data, those threads that take you to a municipality where tax was paid on the export, and connect it to logistics data, and where are the storage facilities, the crushing facilities, that can be sourced from official databases often, production statistics, it can be sourced from the self-declarations of soy trading companies themselves. There is a wealth of information out there that, when triangulated, can give you an extraordinary level of confidence as to how to trace from regions of production to downstream consumers. Now, here we are in Morocco, even more complexity, a small map. So the trick, when we realized that this was too far away, is, use the remote mouse, he says. But maybe Trase, you could be so kind and type in Morocco to the box there.
Give it the remote.
That was your I know you thought you were going to be an esteemed panelist, but you have to spell it right to start. Not in French, in English.
Should be.
There we go, another copy. There she is. And click. And poof! We've clapped 320, thank you, Tessa. We've clapped 320,000 supply chains worldwide into just the ones that link Morocco. I've now realized that we're going to have to do a bit more typing later. We've linked Morocco to the regions in Brazil that produce soy from Morocco. So here's Primavera, here's Novo Mutum. You can start to see where they're popping up on the map, and we can dig in. If we want to now look at Novo Mutum as a place, we can find out some of the key characteristics that distinguish Novo Mutum in this case from other municipalities that you may be sourcing from. Whoa. And what's the exciting part? And what that has enabled us to do is to go from a supply chain map to a geographic map and to be able to hook in. We've got this thread that's enabled us to connect to a single place and suddenly, at the click of a mouse, unlock the rich information that we have about places, about the risks that they face, about the opportunities that they face, about the barriers that constrain or may unlock ways in which the sustainability of these supply chains can be better managed. Now, if we scroll down, you can populate. This is just the beginning. You can populate this and integrate this with all sorts of other spatial data sets. Here we've got environmental indicators, social indicators, and here are the top exporters that are connected to that single municipality. So Bunge, one of the world's largest soy exporters, we can click on there, we can suddenly find out about Bunge. So we're dipping in and out of this incredible complexity, dipping in and out of being eliminated as well. This incredible complexity to be able to choose. It's all part of the effect. It wasn't supposed to happen quite yet. Be able to choose places, find out about those places on cue, and then find out about the companies that are connected to those places, enabling us to zoom in and zoom out. So if we zoom, given that we're looking at Bungie, if we zoom back out to our full supply chain, and let's say that we're not a country anymore, but we're a company, and we're a company that's made an aspirational commitment. And like any who's made an aspirational commitment, they're stuck in thinking, how on earth can we chart the trajectory towards meeting that commitment in the time that's remaining? So here's Bungie, one of the world's largest soy traders. Let's first of all just get an idea of what, at the crude scale, are the places where Bungie is sourcing its soy. So we can recolor the supply chains in this instance by biomes. This tells us of the 6 major biomes in Brazil, of which the Amazon is often the only one that people hear about. But there are 6, and all of the other 5 are more threatened from a conservation perspective than the Amazon itself. And you can see in these different colors, pink being the Sahara, where Bungie is sourcing its soy from. Now, if we zoom in on just the supply chain of Bungie, then we can also look, because the first cut, and our conversations with traders and other downstream actors have made this very clear, what they need in order to go from where they're at to a place where they can reasonably start to make progress at the speeds that are needed is to be able to filter the threats and filter the opportunities quickly, to be able to prioritize those places and the other actors associated with those same places that they should be working with first and with the highest priority. Because if they start with a full supply chain, then it's very hard to get off the ground. So Bungie may be particularly concerned about what is the extent of deforestation directly associated with soy, not necessarily by Bungie, but to understand, for example, which may be the municipalities that expose it to the greatest reputational risk. Well, we can rescale these supply chains by a number of different factors that distribute impacts in this case, or associated impacts to the same municipalities where Bungie is producing. This is not to say that these impacts are driven by Bungie, but this is a measure of soy-related deforestation that is a flag for them. So we can rescale the entire supply chain to ask how much deforestation driven by soy only, and this is from very fine scale maps from our colleagues at AgroSatélite in Brazil, and this is from 2013. How much soy expansion in that same municipality that they're sourcing so much soy from is driven by is soy itself. And here we can start to see, if we zoom in only on the supply chain of Bungie, now we've managed to decompose the supply chain to look at only the trade that we're interested in. You can start to see that there's a pattern in the municipalities with the highest levels of deforestation that are at the top of Bungie's supply chain. So that immediately, with a few clicks of the mouse, has enabled us to zoom in and identify the places, and by default, therefore, the other kinds of actors and the downstream consumers, which themselves are linked, of course, to investors and to pension funds and to other actors that may be interested in having a shared stake in reducing the cost to address this problem. So if we open up, you can see that they're all around this area. Now, this area here, for those who know Brazil, is the soy expansion frontier of Brazil at the moment. It's overall Mato Piba, depending how you say it, region that is the juxtaposition of the states in the north of the Cerrado. So again, we can start to unlock the potential of being able to connect supply chains to places and understand what those connections can tell us about the risks and the opportunities associated with those places. And you can see, if we place production of soy in Brazil, you can see the darker areas indicate higher areas of soy production. And we overlay deforestation on this. You see at the bottom on this matrix, the dark brown is where you've got high soy and high deforestation. Here, in this instance, is not deforestation driven by soy, it's overall deforestation. But nevertheless, you start to see that it's these areas here that are appearing at top of the list for the supply chain of Bungie, where they would be most interested in going, you may think. Now you can do a number of different things with these data. Here is an example that we've already advanced, taking the data out from the platform to be able to embellish and understand in more depth. Where, for example, in this case, here's Bungie's supply chain, and then you can start to juxtapose the supply chains of other actors to understand, if you are one of these traders, which other traders are also operating to the greatest or lesser extent in the same areas as you. You can also start to understand which are the areas where you're sourcing from that may not have such environmental or social problems that can be triaged and placed further down the list. And you can also focus in on those places that really are the red flags that you want to address first. And of course, the stopping point is not there. You then want to understand, well, what are the governance conditions? What are some of the examples of good farming practice? What are some of the potential credit lines for low carbon agriculture? Other opportunities that will be particular to the country and the commodity that you're interested in. And that information can be brought out from by integrating this platform with other geospatial platforms. And of course, there's lots of obvious opportunities there. And we're in advanced conversations with our friends at GFW, at WRI, with Map Biomas, which is embedded in this platform that Trase is involved in leading. There's many opportunities. In Brazil, it's obvious where to do it because there's so many rich data sets. So that's taken us. Let's go back. So that's taken us from being able to tease out individual threads of supply chains to be able to condense this complexity and simplify it to a point where it looks manageable, to connect it to places that may be of greater or lesser concern, to understand who else may be connected to those same places, and to understand perhaps some of the information that already equips you, some of the ingredients that already equip you with the necessary tools and guidance to do something about it. Now, of course, we're on the eve, or we're already on the path, for some, of a huge and unprecedented effort to be able to try and address this situation with this boom in zero deforestation commitments or sustainability commitments of one form or another. Of course, what we don't know is the extent to which they're going to work. Even those who've stepped up and committed them, they're dependent upon the actions of many others. What we see as one of the most powerful opportunities with these data is the potential to connect private sector actors with public sector actors, which I think the panel will do great justice in speaking to, and how some of the challenges can then be shared. But we are at this stage with a few years to go before targets will start to be measured with much more rigor than they've been measured before. And these data and being able to connect actors to places provide us with an unprecedented opportunity to set a baseline for monitoring that change. And I want to show you that in a moment, but before doing so, we're going to ask you to do a straw poll, which is why you've got a little card on your seats. Maybe you sat on it before noticing, but there's a little card on your seats that relates to a website called Slido, sli.do, thank you, Slido, which is a poll, and it doesn't matter if not everyone's seen it. Just to get a flavour in the room, we're going to pop it up on this second screen here. Simply, and this could be placed to any actor, but for the time being, do you think companies will be able to implement their sustainability commitments? So just a broad poll, and you can log on, and you've got the password there, it's 8170. Log on and you can vote, and it's anonymous, so you can be honest, even if you are said company. And it can, of course, a load of reasons to do with cost, to do with time, to do with difficulty. By 2020, this is just not just, eventually at any point. So is this working? Has anybody voted? We've got 16 people. So not a lot of optimism, but some in the room. A few people are still voting. Don't be swayed by looking at this if you haven't yet voted. Oh, people are being swayed. Come on. It's like watching the American election. You have to push it up a little bit more. Okay. Well, what that tells us is we have genuinely no idea what people might respond to this question with. And it's quite a powerful way to try and elicit anonymous voting, elicit what people's assumptions are. So clearly there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of pessimism, perhaps a lot of realism. But there's also some optimism, and that's probably a fair reflection as to where we are. There's broad recognition that we need these commitments. And strobe effects at presentation time. Positive impact. A bit of light. Maybe you vote differently if you turn the lights on. But there's obviously appreciation that something has to change, that it's not going to be easy. So going back to the platform, what we have here is the ability to start to look at that, because we can use other data that's described characteristics of actors that make up supply chains, those that do or do not have a deforestation commitment. Simply those that have and do not have, you can start to break apart the supply chain by just this crude distinction of a commitment. Our friends and colleagues in the Global Canopy program have come up with the Forest 500 platform that many of you are aware of. This is, of course, just the trade in Brazilian soy, so you're not seeing the full breadth of the scale. But you can start to understand this is about the strength of commitment. So in doing so, you can separate those entities, those traders, those countries, to the places, and connect the level of commitment to the place where the soy is being produced. And like before, here's an example we elaborated earlier. This gives us a map. And this, as far as we're aware, is the first time we've been able to come up with a simple baseline map like this that paints Brazil, paints the municipalities that produce soy in Brazil by the proportion of soy that is associated with an exporter that has a commitment for zero deforestation. And of course, that's a vital starting point to be able to then compare this information to trajectories going forwards as to how these places, as determined on aggregate by the different companies that shift over time and shift in space in their connections to hotspots. Maybe some that have a commitment that are connected to areas of high deforestation, relatively low levels of commitment. Maybe they'll move to areas with low deforestation. But ideally, that would not be the only reaction, because of course, that would just protect the supply chains of those companies. Some will hopefully stay and invest to improve the situation in order to maintain the supply that their company relies upon, and needing the kinds of information that are available once you know where you're sourcing from. And with that, I've taken you through a little bit of a journey of being able to simplify this complexity, of being able to identify tiny threads from this otherwise impenetrable ball of string that is the global trade in any commodity, to connect and anchor it to a place that may be of greater or lesser concern, to unveil information that is useful for making decisions about that place, and to start to set baselines as to how we can track the change in performance of the actors connected to that place, and the places themselves as they're determined by all the actors that are connected to them. And now, of course, that is just a tiny tip of the iceberg. And the exercise that we all have in front of us is to imagine what can be done if you unlock and dig in and search the kinds of complexity that this diagram shows for all actors, for all countries, and for all places. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sarah from DCP to give a little reflection as to where we intend to take this before we invite and look very much forward to the reactions and comments from all of you here today. Thank you very much.
Nice. Right. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Toby, for an excellent deep dive into the case of soy from Brazil. And I think the power of the tool lies in not just seeing that we have blanket coverage for all of Brazil, for all exports of soy coming from Brazil, but also this tool, the data that powers it is not just at scale, but also scalable, that we can replicate this in other sectors, in other geographies, and that is exactly what we tend to do. So as Toby mentioned, we plan next to expand Trase to cover soy coming from all soy-producing countries in Latin America, to also cover cattle, tallow, beef, leather products coming from Latin America, also covering timber, as we started in our initial partnership with BV Rio to cover the timber trade. And then next, moving to palm oil from Southeast Asia. But really the possibilities are, in many ways, endless. The data that powers Trase covers all commodities, not just agriculture. It covers TVs, radios, shoes, whatever you like. So we have the power to expand this data to cover any number of country and commodity combinations. So we're really just scratching the surface here with this proof of concept of how this tool can operate, looking at the case of soy in Brazil. But what this also gets at is the ability to really leverage this data to answer these bigger questions that Toby described in some detail around what is the most effective way to drive a deforestation-free economy? What interventions are most effective? How can we leverage different solutions in order to get to the goals that we're aiming for? It's not going to be just Trase or just one other tool or just one initiative, but really the combination of them together. And this tool, Trase, provides the data that underlies so many of those different initiatives. So the ability to really get insight into the commodity supply chains. So some of those questions we can begin to answer, as Toby showed, are questions around the effectiveness of commitments. Are companies implementing these commitments? And are they, in fact, an effective way of driving change? We can also begin to start to look at questions about movement of production over landscapes. So Toby explained the movement into the Sahara. So how are we seeing the transition of soy production and its impacts into new landscapes? We can also see patterns beyond that as well of the ways in which we might not have expected soy to be driving different impacts. And these are questions that are beyond ones that we've addressed, but really leave to all of you in order to pick up. So we see the opportunity for Trase to spark new ideas and new research and to be usable by a wide variety of stakeholders, not just researchers who might be using more advanced techniques, but also the NGO community to drive strategy, commodity traders and buyers who are trying to prioritize their sustainability strategies, financial institutions who are looking to screen the risk in their supply chains, and many other actors who might find this data relevant into implementing their solutions and de-associating themselves from the risk of deforestation. So in our approach, we've covered some of the key pillars. One is clearly the ability to link actors to places, to be able to take this cord and be able to see at different steps in the supply chain the actors that are connected to areas of production, but also to be able to link those actors to the impacts on the ground. But to leverage that data even further by being able to support improved decision-making. How can we take information on where different companies, different buyers, and different countries are sourcing from and link that to impacts on the ground to understand what information is necessary to improve decision-making. And part of the journey to get to that point of being able to make better decisions is having the imagination to see what's possible in truly transforming the transparency of sustainable supply chain. So how can we see what's happening at such great scale that enables better decision-making? So with that, I think it's useful to turn to the panel to see different ways in which there's solutions out there from some of the leaders in different sectors of the supply chain. So our panel will represent commodity actors, public government representatives, and who have worked in a number of different fields to see the way in which we can link public and private efforts to really leverage the power of Trase and this transparency beyond just one platform, but to integrate it into a number of different decision support systems. So with that, I'll introduce our first speaker. We're lucky to have today Kevin Rabinovich, who is the Global Sustainability Director for Mars Incorporated. And if anyone has an imagination of what's possible for sustainability, I would say that's Kevin. So we'll introduce Kevin. If you could speak briefly, we welcome you up here.
Yeah, thank you, Toby, for the demo and Sarah for the intro. Also, thanks for getting me out of the blue-green zone and into the red zone, because then I get to take off my tie, which is a perk. So this is incredible, first of all. Very impressive. So I am, as Sarah well knows, I am an unabashed quant, right? I believe data is the answer to almost everything. Better data, better access to data, better visualization of data data-driven decision-making that's my theory of change, is that's how we're gonna fix this problem, is better data, better metrics, better insight. I think what Trase is doing here is a perfect example of that. As a corporation, so maybe people know, so Mars, very large food business, so we're the world's largest pet food, chewing gum, branded rice, and on any given day, number 1 or number 2 chocolate company in the world. So we buy a lot of commodities from all over the place, including soy in Brazil and other things that eat soy in Brazil, and then we buy them. This is one of the areas where we've made a commitment. So we're committed to zero deforestation in soy in Brazil, and two-thirds, or well, it's gotten a little better. Almost two-thirds of us don't think we're going to achieve that. And I would say, short of getting better access to information, that's probably a realistic goal. I think it's a challenge that a lot of corporations have stepped up to and made commitments to, but both privately amongst ourselves and then even publicly in forums, there's a lot of head scratching that goes on of saying, well, we know what we want to do, but it's not obvious to us how we're going to do it. And that's where I think having sort of the broader community, the data community, step up and say, here are tools that can help you, is critically important to us. The other sort of personal interest I have, something that we're working on that actually came out of a project that Sarah and I worked on when she was still at WRI, was so again, quant data, right? So the hypothesis I'm working on is the problem with deforestation from a corporate point of view is we don't have a way to measure it, right? We know what it is. I mean, it's a tree getting chopped down, but are we counting trees? What's the actual measurement for how we're doing against our commitments? At the same time, lots of companies have made commitments around GHG emissions, probably fewer than have made commitments around deforestation. There is, as anyone in the academic or NGO world would know, there's a very quantitative link between deforestation and GHG emissions. That's not really a discussion in the corporate sector. We don't talk about that. We don't think about it that way. We have sort of this qualitative story of deforestation is bad because it causes climate change, therefore we're going to stop deforestation. But we haven't really gone that next link of putting a number to it. So one of the things you need to do to be able to do that, to say, the deforestation of my supply chain means this many tons of CO2, because you need this level of traceability and transparency to know what numbers to attach to your supply chain. And as soon as you can do that, you can start to track, you can start to measure, you can start to scorecard, you can do all the things that as business we know how to do. So I think this is a tremendous tool. I think it absolutely addresses a need. I've actually got a few other ideas I want to explore with these guys. This visualization platform to do things. So you have customs and bills of lading, right? We have purchase orders, right? Every delivery that shows up in our factory's got a little ticket that goes with it. What can we do with that? So maybe I'll stop there and then on the next week.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's a really good point of what other data is out there and what can we do with it. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. And 2 years ago, we had no idea this data existed and it was usable. And from that, and by we, I mean the people on the data side that I have nothing to do with, created this amazing model and platform. But it's really useful to see how this helps bridge the gap between commitments or ideas around sustainability and actual driving change. So next, I'd like to invite up Rosa Maria Vidal. She's the Executive Director of the Governor's Climate and Forest Fund. And Maria's in a great position to tell us how Trase connects more to some of the local action, how we can start working in producer governments to enact change and leverage the connections between Trase and some of the existing monitoring systems. Right?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I have been looking at Trase since a couple of days, and I have been thinking on how to use the power of this information to engage the local governments, national governments, to start talking more proactively with the private sector. I think also the data is very important and it's very useful, but I think that we also need not only better data, but better partnerships. And I think that information could help us on doing that and beyond that. I'm a little concerned about how the private sector is going to use this information. The Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, that is a network of 35 jurisdictions in the tropical countries, from Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Nigeria, and Ivory Coast. They represent 30% of the tropical forests in the world. And of course, are also jurisdictions in which a lot of the soy is produced. And a lot of the cattle, a lot of the palm oil. And these governments are facing the challenge of course, also fulfill their commitments. They have signed a declaration in the task force that is achieving reductions of 80% of deforestation by 2020. If we ask the same question, I probably will have the same answer. Are they going to be able to fulfill this commitment? I don't know. It all depends. And depends on how they could build new partnership. They can really change the way that the policies are working and also how they can bring benefits to their communities. I think deforestation is becoming something that these governors are now questioning because they haven't seen the finance coming to the ground. And they're worried about the companies to be scared of deforestation, of the risk of deforestation, instead of sitting together and discussing how to achieve common goals. So I think that the use of this information can be for good, but also for bad. I mean, if we don't facilitate these conversations and dialogues, and we don't help these jurisdictions that have also commitments, we just use information from our desk. In Brussels, London, and we decide, well, this is a very risky jurisdiction and we're buying from here, probably we are going to stop our business there. That will mean more deforestation because that means less jobs for communities, less opportunity, less, And I think that's exactly what our members are asking us is how we can have more productive conversations. And as I already mentioned, they are also putting their own commitments on the table. And I think that thinking strategically and using the information wisely is what is needed. So thank you very much for this. We are also supporting through the fund, working in a tool that the task force have, that is the Governor's Climate and Forest Fund. It's a small facility that we provide grants to support the governments, and they are also thinking in putting together platforms. We have been starting conversations on thinking how we can bring those state-level platforms, jurisdictional-level platforms that also are aimed to have more transparency of how they're putting together the policies, how they're making progress in connection with these other platforms, so decision-making can be more holistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemaria. It's an excellent point about needing more holistic decision-making, and hopefully we can begin to answer some of those questions around what types of information we need to make the most effective decisions. Next, Elameda Tomas Samre from the EU RED facility and from the European Forest Institute. And Tomas has a great perspective on exactly some of what Rosa mentioned in terms of being able to actually build these connections between producer and consumer countries. And the ability to start drawing out these connections through Trase to see is very tangible and real trade flows that connect these two different yet often distant actors in supply chains. Tomas?
Thank you, Sarah, and to all the Trase team. It's really impressive for me to see yet another presentation that has so many novel elements in it. The last presentation I saw was on Wednesday. Between Wednesday and today, I can assure you that there is so much new elements in this platform. To me, really what's impressive, and I think this is the beginning of a revolution, is that we're seeing that transparency will become a competitive advantage. So far, we've struggled for so many years to try to convince the private sector, try to convince the producer countries to release some of the data on supply chains to understand better what are the risks and opportunities in trade. And we've never had a complete picture. Here we have a complete picture to start with. Maybe that's not what everybody would like to see, and some of the private sector, as Rosa said, would be probably a bit frightened to see all this. But at least it's a starting point. And I believe this is really a starting point to unlock some much more transparency. I should have said maybe a few words on my organization. I work for the EU Red Facility, and that's a program that was funded a few years back by the European Union on Red Plus, with a mandate to work closely not only on red issues, but also on trade issues between Europe and the partner countries. We've got a whole team working on FLEGT, so on the legal trade of timber, and looking at this kind of platform, if it had existed already at the time when we were negotiating the first commercial agreements on timber between the European Union and partner countries, would have been in a very different situation. Would have been able to identify much more sharply the key actors from the private sector, key jurisdictions, subnationally, that have a stake in the trade between the two parties. Would have been able to incentivize progress along the way, showing how maybe some of the most proactive actors are actually climbing the ladder of higher standards and lower risk. Would have been able to monitor progress along the way. All of these things that are very important and that have prevented rapid progress on those deals. Just the good news, maybe some of you know that this week actually the first FLEGT licensed timber that will come to the EU from Indonesia is going to happen. So finally, those deals have been able to emerge, but we think that with this kind of new information, it will be much easier in the future, not only on timber, but also on other commodities, depending on the political willingness to work on that too. But we think that data can also help policymakers to be a bit more willing to take some action, some risks on those issues. Because the EU is, as you know, probably is looking into addressing the commodity drivers of deforestation. The next 2 years are going to be very important. I think it's a window of opportunity in the EU to look at these issues. There is currently ongoing a feasibility study to look at what kind of existing and new policy measures could be done at European level to address these drivers of deforestation. And the start of that process was, interestingly, a couple of years ago, in 2013, a footprint study. So the EU did its own analysis of how much deforestation is actually being imported in the EU for the consumption of all these commodities, palm oil, soy, beef, etc. And it took a lot of time, much more time than the time we took to do this platform, to evaluate that it was approximately, over the last decade, 500,000 hectares of deforestation every year coming into the EU consumer products. And that was a one-off study. If we had to repeat that study, it would be a lot of time and resources. Now, it seems that with just one click, we could redo that analysis with Trase, at least on soy. So, very excited to be following this very interesting space on supply chain transparency. And on Wednesday, we had for the first time at the COP venue some policymakers from the EU, from the Dutch government, to look into this more closely. And I think that we need to digest a bit more to what extent this could be useful for the policy process. But we're committed to help them on that. And I think just to make the link with Rosa Maria presentation, I think the philosophy in the EU is really to try to develop policies in partnership with the southern countries that export the commodities. And we think that that too can really help that dialogue to be more concrete. So we were just discussing before, while we're waiting for the event to start, with Rosa, already discussing how we could maybe taking the pretext of the tool to organize a dialogue between some EU countries and some of the governance climate task force jurisdictions to look at different scenarios. If we were to use a zero deforestation standard, if we were to use a legality standard, if we were to use a zero illegal deforestation standard, or any variation of these standards, how would the trade between your members and our clients in the EU would look like? And is there any common interest between those parties to work together and use this kind of platform to monitor their collaboration? So that's where we are looking at, and really hoping to use already this COP to start building a community of users. On my side, I'm really interested in government users, to build an alliance of users around the use of these amazing capabilities. And again, congratulations to the Trase team for that. Thank you. The last word, because I forgot. Francisco from Côte d'Ivoire is in the, I'm very glad he came with me on this, because this is just an amazing example of how this platform could also extend to other platforms that exist in the producing countries, or also in the consumer countries. So Francis is from Côte d'Ivoire and is representing the rubber supply chain, and is an association of rubber producers, and 95% of the rubber produced in Côte d'Ivoire, that's 400,000 hectares, basically they monitor all that production at this institution. And they have all the data, and they know which part of the supply chain is actually legal, which part is actually zero deforestation. So this data sits in Côte d'Ivoire. It's not being used to promote anything, and this kind of platform could give them a lot of visibility in the future. And that's happening in Côte d'Ivoire, but in many other countries, this data is there. It's not used by the market. Maybe Mars would be interested to know where the legal and deforestation-free cocoa is in Côte d'Ivoire, although the information system on cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire is not as good as the rubber one. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And it's amazing to see there's already conversations happening about how to connect using Trase as that facilitator. But it is really not just about companies being responsible or governments, but starting those conversations between the different actors in order to facilitate change. Next, I'll invite up our last speaker, Tasso Azevedo, who certainly knows about making change in the sector. He's been working in Brazil for quite some time, founder of the Map Biomas project, long time and founder as well in the Flora, and someone who can speak broadly about the role of transparency and partnerships in driving transformative change. It's not just about soy in Brazil, it's also cattle, and it's about the range of actors that are working in that space. So how can we look at the bigger picture of the commodity sectors and able to really advance what we would consider a true deforestation economy, not just taking a sector by sector approach. Tasso?
I don't know if I will talk about what you said. Let's talk about many things here. But first, obviously, excellence, because it's kind of open a window, a lot of things that you can imagine what to do with this kind of data. In one hand. But in the other hand is that since we are just starting to dig into that, probably now, if you try to look to answer any of the questions that actually you find out for the respondents, you will not find the answer. Actually, it's just a curiosity. You can look at data and you can imagine various ways in which you can use that to actually find the data. So, but it clearly points out how to do it. So it's kind of how you think, well, oh, now you have that, so it's like give these other 2, 3, 4 steps and boom, we'll be there, right? Very soon. So the first thing that is important is that we have to have but we need one bar, let's say one step, before you have the municipality. Because the information about the municipality is just saying something about one piece of land, which has, people operating in different ways, with different times that have deforestation in different moments and so on. So if we don't go to this step, before the municipality to actually understand what's going on inside the municipality, we can have a use of this data that will be perverse, which is a sort of a boycott. So you say, this region is too much risky, there is too much deforestation, better not just don't buy from this region, not just go from another region. And then this is a very big disincentive to whoever is doing the good thing. So this idea that we have to get down to what is the production side and how it's been happening, and then we use this kind of tool to actually identify who is doing good, and then put lights on them, not just put lights on bad things, but also on the good things. It will be very, very, very important. And this can give us, bring us the question of this whole type of exercise based on mass balance. Basically, you take volumes, and then you imagine that those volumes have some kind of distribution in one municipality, in one region, and so on, and then you keep moving this on the chain of custody as a mass balance. And then if you're doing so without knowing what exactly is the production side, the only way to solve your decision whether to buy or not from one region is to say yes or no to the whole municipality. So you don't understand what's going on. So it's very important to get into the production side. So where you can actually start to answer in an easier way. So if you take one municipality that have just one buyer, then it's done, right? So I did just try one example that I thought would be logical. So I took Santarém. So Santarém is obviously just Cargill, it's buying from there. It's their port. So you could say that all the soybean that is being traded from Santarém is actually with one company. So, okay, but in Santarém, you have soybean that is being produced on areas that have been clear-cut last year, or that could be clear-cut 15 years ago. What counts for you, right? So what matters for you? I mean, you're worried about everything that happens after 2008, after 2010, after this year. Well, it depends on what's your commitment, right? So one thing that would be really interesting is the integration of the data that we have here with the data from the production side. So you can put those two things together and make questions like, how much of this soybean that Cargill is buying from Santarém is actually from deforestation in different years, or you can have different cause and effects or something like that, and you can take your decision as you would like to have. But anyway, we have to find ways in which we can go down to the farm. So in the case of Brazil, I think we have a great opportunity. Now the car system is really getting traction, and the news that we have now, that hopefully by the end of this month, all the data will be available in public, including all the maps and all the data, including from each of the properties. So I can imagine that very easily you can make this connection and you have this information, at least from what are the areas that have production and so on. The other point that I think it's a key element for us to think about is this whole notion of making sense of the volumes and whatever is being produced and whatever we're saying it's being traded. All the information here is about trade. So you just say, well, this much volume was, was traded in the municipality X, and then you have the whole information that comes from. But does this municipality actually produce this? Does it make sense that this is being produced in this municipality? Maybe for soybean will not be a big issue, but definitely will be a big issue for timber. It will be a huge issue cattle and stuff like that. So, so there is a lot of things that we have to think about how we make sense of this. Is it possible to actually estimate what is the real production in different areas, so you can make this connection? So that's the level of things that we need to have if we really want to say that we are able to guarantee that the deforestation-free commitments of the different companies and supply chains are really happening. With what we have here, it helps a lot, but we don't give an answer. It just gives some sense of maybe we have more risk here and there, and it would be important to collate all this things together. Yeah, so the other thing is about the whole thing about transparency is like I like this concept of radical transparency because it's first of all, I believe that this is always in favor of all the players in the chain of custody, at least all the players that wants to do this right? So one of the interesting aspects of this data is that there is a lot of data from companies here that the way they behave in relation to their data in Brazil is that they are completely against to have their data available, but actually this data is being sold, right? You buy the data that's here. So I will use this a lot. So what's the meaning? So you can buy your data, this data, but you don't want to use this data to actually achieve your own goals and targets. So I think it will be an interesting debate for I would like to hear from you, like in 2-3 months, how this plays out as this has been going on. But definitely, I think it's absolutely excellent. It's the potential is huge, and if I can suggest something very practical to start now to help the others to connect. First is to have a place where you can download whatever you see. So whatever you choose and select and see, there should be a way in which you download the data that you're seeing, so you can play a little bit. And the other is to make the direct connection with the maps. Like, for example, when you click on one country where it comes from, then you can see the things on the map. Because once you have that done, then we can interconnect with all the production tools that are available already. But it's a great job like that.
Thank you, Tasso. Some good suggestions. Lots of room for improvement, clearly, because we're just getting started. At this point, I'd like to invite all of the speakers up on stage, actually, and open it up to a little bit of question and answer, if you wouldn't mind. And we should have other mics as well. So, Adrian. Fantastic. And maybe actually be useful. Toby, do you want to join them as well, and we can combine question and answer sessions as well? And while everyone's getting settled, one of the questions I like to follow up with Tasso is your point that transparency is in fact good for everyone that's noted in the supply chain if they're doing the right thing. And I think that's a point that we don't hear very often. We often hear the other side, that companies are afraid or that transparency is scary. And wondering if we can grab one of the mics up here, if you can expand on why you think transparency is especially promising and beneficial to various supply chain actors.
Yeah. But first, what we mean by transparency. The thing about I think the rationale is the only thing that should not be transparent is something that has absolutely a reason to be secured or something like that. So that's a formula of Coca-Cola. But obviously it should be transparent that there is sugar, there is this and that element, right? So that's what I mean. So And so the idea of having whatever information is absolutely crucial, that it has to be, public secure, that should be the rationale. And I'll start by government, for example. So when you are at the government, every time you open and release information, you have millions of people, thousands of people, or organizations that can actually play a lot of your roles or pointing out where you have to go. Because you're always in the resource. So it's very smart. As much as you put information out, you get more people to help you to find, and fulfill your obligations of being more strategic and something like that. So when you have a commitment on a company, on a business or a sector, etc., on doing the right thing, as much as you can open the information and make it available, obviously, securing justice, something that also is strategic, it will be easier to fulfill that because we have collectively everybody looking on the same direction, working in the same direction. So there is ways in which you can also do that without actually releasing all the information, but having some elements of the kind of clearinghouse where everybody puts the information, everybody can see the result collectively, although you cannot tap into the information of the other individual. This kind of tools and always is a favor.
Great. We can open it now to questions from the audience as well, for either Toby on the demonstration and capabilities of Trase, or to the panelists on the way in which Trase might apply to their particular positions and generally their role in the supply chain. Adrian will bring you a mic as well.
Thanks. Richard King from Chatham House. Congratulations to the team. It's a fantastic product, really impressive. Question to Kevin from Mars. The framing here has been around deforestation, but clearly there's a lot of other useful socioeconomic governance data also in there or coming down the line. I'm interested from your point of view, when you're making sort of sourcing decision making, how you might play off some of those different metrics. So clearly you have a deforestation commitment, but where do some of these other indicators come into that decision making process?
So I think one of the, I have all these sort of pet theories of how to do things, right? So you heard one on deforestation, GHG, and one on data. I have another one, which is, or we have another one, I guess, which is that, too close to each other. There we go, that's better. I think one of the challenges in sustainability is it sometimes feels like the message we get as corporations from civil society, from governments, from consumers even, is everything matters, right? Every impact is important. Deforestation is important, every flavor of human rights is important, water stress is important, everything, right? And if everything's important, nothing's important. Right. So I think one of the challenges is to figure out how do you condense, what you need to be focused on down to what really drives the most important things, right? And so there's an analogy for me here with financial metrics, right? So the management team of any business really only looks at 3 or 4 financial metrics. Sales, earnings, some sort of return on asset, maybe cash, right? That's it, right? Every other financial measure in a business is feeding into a calculation that works its way up to those 4, right? I think what we need and what we've been working to develop, this is again actually how Sarah and I first got to know each other, was working on a project to do something similar for environmental metrics, to try and figure out how do you build a system that ladders up to some top level things. So there's a couple things, there's a couple implications of that. One is it's not one thing, so it's not just GHGs, right? It's not just income, right? You know, you've got to figure out, how do I cover the as much of the space as possible of everything with as few metrics as possible? But you then have to deal with all those metrics at once, right? So in the same way on the financial side, a strategy that does nothing but drive growth, you know, so you could spend 100% of the sales price of a product on marketing, and it's going to grow, right? But you make no money because you've spent your entire sales price in the marketing budget. You've still got to buy raw materials, and in fact, you're losing money. So you've got to juggle all three of them or four of them, financial metrics at once. We've got to develop the same sort of mindset around environmental and social metrics of knowing what's the absolute goal, and then how do you work across the portfolio of your raw materials, your products, your factories, whatever, to get to the total that you need to get to. Maybe one other comment to the point that Trase and Rosa made was, so pet theory number 4. When there's no data, when there's no data available, there's a strong incentive to not share, right? Because, or at least there could be a strong incentive to not share. So the default mindset of a lot of corporate entities is, you know, if I share data, something bad could happen because I've shared data. So I'm better off, you know, somebody could figure out something about my business, whatever, so I'm gonna hold it in. But as soon as there's a number out there, even if it's not a great number, as soon as there's a number out there and your customer or your supplier says, I'm assuming that number applies to you, right? So if, you know, I take this data, I now got a conversation with Cargill and say, well, Trase tells me this is the number, this is the deforestation for soy for you in Brazil, right? Now the motivation is completely flipped around, right? Now the motivation is, no, that's not my number. Let me share with you this other information where I've dug in deeper and I actually know that we're better than it says, right? Same thing on the municipality side, right? So if you've only got visibility at a municipality level, but there are some good guys and some bad guys, good girls and bad girls, inside that municipality, the good actors inside that municipality now have a motivation to say, whoa, hang on, right? You know, disaggregate us, separate us from that lumped in average because we don't want to get left behind. So now there's motive. So getting a number out there flips the motivation around.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Kevin for that point because I was going to make the same point. And I think the point that Rosa and Tessa made is the most critical one because we wanted this discussion not just for people to be, oh, wow, that's impressive. Of course, there are huge challenges and risks associated with data. There's use and there's abuse. And I think that's a key issue. And it'll be fantastic to really work together with the kinds of operations and activities that people on this stage in this room are involved in. And that, what Kevin said, is the core of our theory of change, is that it shifts the burden of proof to those who hitherto have not held any of it, often. So that they're exposed into demonstrating that they are the good actors and not the bad. And indeed, we have in our strategy the intention to be able to make the platform sufficiently interactive that a good actor can, if they're so motivated, take themselves out of the picture. And by doing so, expose, decompose, as you say, and expose the residual impacts associated with the residual actors. And the other thing I would say that is another kind of piece, solution to the challenge that Tassa and Rosa so rightly allude to, is to use these data in the last demonstration that I gave to demonstrate that if everybody moved, they wouldn't meet their commitments. There isn't the supply for all of these actors that have made the commitments to just shift to where there isn't a problem and leave a vacuum. If everyone stepped up, we could do scenarios of these kinds of data and demonstrate that unless you want to only protect yourself and drive indirect effects in the places that you've left, then you're going to have to stay and invest. And furthermore, we need to use this kind of platform to connect and unlock a huge wealth of data that can provide positive examples of where things have been done well and give a spotlight to success stories, and also provide data on some of the things that may be necessary to at least get a start, to have a toehold in how to make a change and have a difference. And that might be anything to do with particular credit lines in that place, or maybe examples of certified schemes that have been successful. Or it may just simply be knowing what the phone number is of the local environmental agency enforcement officer so that you can have direct contact. So I just thought that's an excellent exchange between both the very valid critique and the insight into how it can be addressed, and that's exactly what we want to try and stimulate in this group and going forward. Thanks.
Here's another question.
Hi, I'm Johanna Beekman from Mercator Research Institute in Berlin. And thanks a lot. I think this is really, really amazing and very impressive. I was wondering in how far, so if I would now like to use this data for my research, can I just download it somehow, or can you, because I imagine that data is private, right? Or you bought it, and so there might be problems, so I might be able to use it just on the website or so.
Thank you. I don't know whether you know our friend Javier, and he may have texted you during the meeting to say, you need to make the point that this is, if it wasn't made clear enough already, this is publicly available. It's not downloadable yet, simply because if we had launched on Monday, then maybe it would have been already. This has been something of a rush to fix all of the issues. But we made the point earlier, just to say it again, this is an open access platform that is independent, does not rely on any confidential data. It relies on a lot of data that's publicly available and relies upon some data that I would classify as publicly purchasable, and that's customs and bills of lading. However, we're using those as ingredients into a much bigger picture, such that it is impossible with our end product. And you actually can download some data as an example data set, because this for us is at the core of our entire theory of change and our belief system that these data are open access. So one of the blocks that says soy by the numbers, you can download the basic trade data product that we produced. But those data put together make it impossible to reverse engineer the original data from the trade companies that sold us pieces of it. And we've had deep conversations with them, and they're entirely happy with that. So maybe further down the line, that position might change. Publicly available, and it will be downloadable. And thank you for having pointed out that it wasn't made clearly enough already.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, another question I had. I was wondering, would it actually be possible to show in how far the soy ends up in certain types of products? Because for now, as I understood it, you can only see the retailers, right? And then this could be a powerful tool for consumers, actually. I'm thinking of these Greenpeace campaigns not to buy KitKat anymore.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, the supply chain that you saw us project stops actually at the country of import, full piece. And our ability to have kind of blanket coverage of the trade is only really made possible by the fact that we're dealing with the middle piece. As Trase very rightly said, we need for many applications to dive deeper into the production site. We would argue that there's advantages for the types of discussions that we're having still to have those data rather than none at all, given how hard that is. And of course, you can dig deeper into the consumption side. But what we've got is a hook into which further players and buyers downstream know something about who they're buying from. So they can start, for example, if you were an investor, we could develop a tool that you typed in your investment portfolio and you got out information about where you were connected to. But this is just the start. So we're very interested in digging into domestic markets and producer nations. 80% of Brazilian beef is eaten in Brazil. A lot of soy in Brazil is fed to chickens that are then eaten wherever. You can easily follow those chickens. Follow the soy that's fed to a cow that then turns into a leather handbag in Italy that then ends up in an investment portfolio of a bank in London. And the economy ends up being circular at some point. But we're very keen to dig into exactly that. And we hope that many researchers around the world will use these data to do exactly that. And if we don't hear about those things, then that would be a tremendous indication of success.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm sure the panelists will be around while we drink wine and eat snacks. So one more question, and we'll have to cut it short.
Just a quick one, Toby. I haven't asked you exactly how you did the soy thing, but would it be easy to replicate what agricultural commodities in Brazil, and how quickly can you do that? And second, in the same way that our timber work, we're kind of wondering how we can replicate to other countries because they have different sets of data, data sets and different types of documentation. How easy it would be to replicate to other countries, and have you guys looked into that?
Thanks, Pedro. And just to reiterate what Nikki said at the beginning, that I emphasize, because of his modesty, we've got a very nice example of where we think that this collaboration between Trase and the Better Yield program platform is taking tracing of illegality in timber. Where can we go in other countries? We have some documents at the back on our vision, which lays out the countries we think are most attainable. You can buy trade data from most Latin American countries, Southeast Asian countries. You can't buy it from exports from African countries. You're starting to see some product there. You can buy import data. You can't buy or access import data from the EU. We think that a platform like this is quite a powerful lever to help encourage the EU to realize that that's not a very constructive thing. To expand into commodities, of course, you know very well, better than I, as Trase and others here on the panel. Other commodities are far more complex, so you'll have higher levels of uncertainty. But we believe quite strongly that we can expand this at some level of confidence to all sorts of commodities. Some are extremely easy, and you get even more detail, like coffee, which is bagged and stamped at the farm. That's quite easy to trace down to much finer scales. And others will be more complex. I mean, we know that cattle are often grown and fattened on multiple farms. So how do you deal with that? But back to Kevin's point, you have an entry point that you can then dig into deeper and try and find out extra information as needed. But yes, some of the commodities are going to be palm oil, for example, of course, also very complex. But there's a huge thirst for this information. So our kind of general belief is something is often better than nothing, provided we're as transparent about our methods as we are about our data, and that's something that we hope to always be.
Excellent. Really great points, and I think the questions actually raise just as many more questions as they did answers, but that's exactly the point, is to start having the conversations about what we do with traceability and where we go and actually addressing the risks that come up from looking into these supply chains. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists and welcome Nikki back up for a brief closing.
Yes. Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to, it's been an excellent session, and I've made a lot of notes about a wrap-up of the amazing points that were made that I think also reinforced and supported each other, but you'll be relieved to hear I'm not going to give that wrap-up because we're out of time. What I do say is just this point, which Toby also, when we approach this endeavor, we were very aware and we remain aware of the need that was highlighted so well by the panelists to be aware of context, to bring in context, to apply great care with this information, and above all, to start conversations and partnerships, as Rosa Maria said so well, because only then do we go forward and make sure that this kind of transparency can lead to positive outcomes. Kevin's point about financial info. At GCP, we talk a lot about wanting to get to a Bloomberg for the natural world. Not a separate Bloomberg, the same Bloomberg. Alongside financial data. We need environmental, social, and governance data side by side with financial data for the right decisions to be made. So that's, I think, a vision for the coming years for radical transparency. And I'm going to just end by going back to the beginning. Pierre, who, for those who weren't here at the start, unfortunately said he can't be here, but truly is the driving force and inspiration behind this work and has kept this team going and has really had the insights and the bravery to move this quite daunting project forward. And when we say to him, you'll see on the platform, there's some unknown virus. And you say to him, yeah, this big bit of unknown virus. And he says, nothing is unknown, nothing is unknown. And he gets quite cross. Because he knows how to get to the answer. He knows about the 2, 3, 4 steps. I thought Trase's point was fantastic about this opening, bridging the space. You know, this doesn't give the answers. It bridges the space. It provokes, and only as a community working together and connecting up. I mean, that's the beauty of digital platforms, is that they can connect. So we can have done this work if it wasn't for other platforms that have come before that we could just plug into to solve problem X. You know, so that's why this could be done as quickly as it was. So I think that is the challenge. And when there's another set of data called to the order, we'll know when a container is traded around for the best buyer, so we lose sight of it. And on the question of to the order containers, which we label as such on the platform, Javier said, well, people should just get off their sofas and go down to the port and see what's happening to those containers. And, you know, I wouldn't think of that. He's right, and that's how he operates. That's how he got to where he got in moving this work forward. And I think that's what we need to do. That's the challenge. But the truth is that to meet the promise of radical transparency, we can't reverse engineer everything. We can't build an edifice painstakingly with hundreds of hours, hundreds of thousands of human hours trying to piece back reality. To get to radical transparency, it needs to be embedded into the system. We need the rules of the game to change so that those that can disclose should disclose. And then I think we can really get to radical transparency. And I'll end with Javier's wish for this work, that so many of us have put so much effort into, not just at our 2 partner institutions, but at so many institutions that have contributed so much to this work. And his wish, and what is an inevitability, is that in a few years, he says, this is going to look ridiculous. We're proud that this is going to be a toy. And let's hope so, because we need transparency that goes far beyond what we have here, and we need to provoke each other and get to that transparency as quickly as we can. So with that, thank you so much for a wonderful event. Very grateful to our panel, to you who came to be with us and ask questions, and please join us for drinks. Thank you very much.
The last thing that we need. Have I done that? I was doing it earlier, but I didn't realise. Didn't expect it to be this. I've been working with you guys supply chain stuff. Yeah. But not really working.